Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be diving into a case that is equal parts heartbreaking and baffling. The Idaho College Murders. We're really going deep on this one, way past just the headlines, trying to get to the bottom of what makes this case tick.
Yeah, and what really strikes me, what makes it so perplexing, is how it really highlights how thin that line is between, our everyday lives and something totally unthinkable. And we're not talking about like some random act of violence in a dark alley somewhere. This happened in a place that should feel safe. Moscow, Idaho? I mean, you say that and you think like quintessential college town, right?
For sure. You think like, football games, those little coffee shops everyone hangs out at, that sense of you're young and invincible and you're with all your friends. Then November 12th, 2022 happens and that's it. It's like that bubble just bursts.
It really goes to show you that even in those places that seem idyllic, darkness can find a way in. And the fact that this happened in a place where people felt so safe, well, it gets under your skin, makes you wonder about your own sense of safety.
It really does. And, the fact that this happened to college students just living their lives, it's unsettling. Like Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, they weren't just friends, right?
Right.
Childhood best friends. And then Xana Kernodle and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, all at the house that night. Their stories, their futures, it was all taken just like that.
And I think that's what's so important to remember. Behind all the headlines, all the theories and the speculation, these were real people with families, with futures that were just cut short. They had lives, routines, the kind of stuff anyone who's been to college can relate to. And that's part of what makes this whole thing so hard to wrap your head around.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's rewind a bit. November 12th, 2022. Looks like a normal Saturday night in Moscow. Kaylee and Madison were at a bar. Ethan and Xana were at a party on campus. Just, typical college stuff.
And the timeline here is really important. So they all got back to their place. It was an off-campus house after 1:30 in the morning. Kaylee and Madison got back together, and then Ethan and Xana a bit before them. The thing is, there was no sign of forced entry or anything like that.
And that just makes everything that happened next even more terrifying. So it's those early morning hours, sometime between 3 and 4 a.m., and two of the roommates are asleep downstairs. They have no clue what's going on.
Just think about that for a second. The killer gets into the house without anyone knowing, commits this horrible crime, and somehow two people in the same house sleep through the whole thing. That tells you this was thought out, planned. It's chilling.
Like something straight out of a nightmare.
Yeah.
And we got to remember, those two roommates, they woke up in a crime scene. They had no idea until around noon when one of them found them and called 911.
Just awful. Can you imagine the shock, the pure terror? It's unimaginable. And just the fact that they were even able to process what had happened to even make that call.
Absolutely. That phone call, though, that was it. It was like the moment that peace in Moscow, Idaho vanished. And it brought this case into the national spotlight.
Yeah.
But how did it happen? And why?
Those are the million-dollar questions, right? And those are exactly the questions we're going to start unpacking as we get deeper into this story. We'll be looking at the investigation, all the evidence, and, all those theories that are swirling around this case.
So that 911 call is like the moment everything changed, right? The world finding out about this awful scene in a normal off-campus house. But what were investigators actually looking at when they got there?
It was chaotic, the whole crime scene. But there were these really disturbing details. Every single victim had been stabbed multiple times. And some of the wounds, they showed signs of a struggle, like they were fighting for their lives.
So then it's even weirder that there wasn't any forced entry, isn't it? Like if it was random, you'd think there'd be more signs of a fight getting in, wouldn't you?
Right. That's one of the things that makes this case so strange. It's almost like the killer knew the house, or at least was, like, really confident or something. And it just makes that main question even bigger. Just how did they even get inside? Was the door unlocked? Was there some way in nobody noticed? Or did they know one of the victims just knocked on the door and got let in?
Okay, so we've got a house, locks from the outside, a murder scene inside, and no weapon. Didn't they think it was a big knife?
Yeah, they said it was probably a combat knife because of how bad the wounds were and how many. But finding it, good luck with that. Did the killer take it? Get rid of it somewhere close by? Each thing you think of just leads to more questions.
And speaking of questions, what about the two roommates who were there?
No.
I can't get over that. I mean, how do you sleep through that?
I know, right? People have been asking that from the beginning. Some experts think maybe it was the sound or the layout of the house, with the victims' rooms being on a different floor. Maybe the noise was muffled.
So it's possible they weren't being negligent, or even worse, somehow involved, which people were saying early on.
We have to be careful about jumping to conclusions, especially with a case this confusing. The police haven't said they're suspects, and they're right not to. Can you imagine waking up to that? It's awful.
Yeah, you're right. It's just awful all around. But when there aren't any solid answers, it makes sense that people come up with theories.
Totally. And the one you hear the most is about Kaylee Goncalves, that maybe she had a stalker. Her family has been really vocal about it. They've said that Kaylee had mentioned someone creeping on her a few weeks before she was killed.
Which would make sense if this was a targeted attack, right? Someone obsessed, waiting for their chance.
Yeah.
But did they ever find anything to back that up, the stalker thing?
That's just it. The police haven't said much, and they haven't said if there was a stalker or not, but it's possible they're not saying anything on purpose, so they don't mess up the investigation. It's a tough spot they have to keep people informed, but also protect the case.
Makes sense. You don't want to say something small and then it tips off the killer or ruins things for the jury later on. So the stalker theory, while interesting, isn't confirmed.
Exactly. And it's important to remember there are other theories too. I mean, this was brutal. It seems personal. Some people think it was a crime of passion.
So you mean someone who was really close to one or more of the victims? Maybe an angry ex? Or someone who felt really wronged?
Right, exactly. It just screams like intense rage, a vendetta. And even though there's no proof of that either, it's something the police can't just ignore.
And then there's the theory that's like almost too much to think about. The idea that this was done for the thrill of it.
It's the violence and the fact that there isn't some other obvious reason.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if the killer was drawn to this house, to these people, because of some dark fantasy.
It's just awful to think about someone being that cruel. But until there's some kind of real evidence, it's just another theory, just as scary as the others. So where does the investigation stand now? Any big breaks?
The police are keeping quiet, but we do know they've been going through all the evidence really carefully, especially DNA they found at the scene.
And I mean, this is 2024, so I'm guessing DNA tech is way more advanced than when this first happened, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's incredible how far it's come. Now they can figure out who someone is from the tiniest amount: skin cells, little bits of hair, even DNA you leave behind from touching something. It's a whole different level of forensics.
Wow. So even if the killer was careful, they could have left a clue without even realizing it.
Exactly. And it's not just physical evidence anymore. There's all that digital stuff too. Investigators would have gotten phone records, what people were doing on social media, even location data from any devices that were around that night.
It's kind of scary how much info we put out there every day without even thinking, huh?
It's a double-edged sword, that's for sure. It's great for surveillance, but it also helps investigators put together where people were, like a trail. And in a case like this, where we just don't have a lot to go on, those digital breadcrumbs could be what breaks it open.
It makes you wonder, with everybody always on their phones and online, is it even possible to do something like this and not leave a trace?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that keeps a lot of investigators up at night. But I can tell you this. Every day that passes, every new piece of technology, it gets harder and harder to get away with anything. And for the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, that's got to be a little bit of hope, even though it's been such a long and horrible wait.
And that weight hasn't just been felt in Moscow either. This case, it's captivated the whole country, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It just shows how powerful collective grief can be. And the anger when you see young people's lives cut short like that, people want answers, they want justice, and they support the families who are left behind to pick up the pieces.
It's like a reminder that we're not just talking about names in a news story. These were real people with people who loved them, whose lives are forever changed because of this.
And it's a harsh reminder of how much damage violence does, the impact on the university, on Moscow. It's something that will stay with them for a long, long time.
Let's talk about that more, that impact, after we take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We were talking about how these murders really impacted people way beyond just what happened in that house. I mean, it made a lot of people think, could this happen anywhere?
Yeah, it really makes you think about, like, how safe are we really anywhere? You know, Moscow, Idaho, it seems so safe, so far away from everything bad in the world. And I think that's what's so disturbing, is like, it makes you realize that there's nowhere that's really, truly safe.
It's true. It's not just big cities or places far away where things like this happen. It can happen anywhere, even places that seem peaceful and idyllic. It makes you think twice about your own safety, about the places you thought were safe havens.
And for the University of Idaho, for the town of Moscow, that sense of safety, it's gone. Imagine being a student there when it happened. The fear, the not knowing what was going to happen next, it must have been awful.
The sources we looked at said that classes were canceled after the murders, and a lot of students actually left campus. They were too scared to stay. it just shows you how much these events mess with your mind. The impact goes way beyond just the crime itself.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that these kinds of things, they don't have an expiration date on grief, on trauma. The families of those victims, they carry that weight every day. The community, they're marked by what happened, by all the what ifs and the whys, long after it's not on the news anymore.
It's heavy stuff. And it really shows you that even now, with all our technology and forensic science, some things just can't be answered. We may never fully understand why someone would do something like this, what kind of darkness lives in someone to make them do that.
It's weird, right? We have all this information at our fingertips, we can track everything we do, but the human mind, it's still a total mystery. And in a case like this, where we don't know why it happened, that mystery just keeps us hooked, keeps us looking for those answers.
And maybe that's part of why this case is still so interesting to people, so hard to forget. It reminds us that even in the most normal places, even when you least expect it, things can change in a split second. It makes you think about how fragile life is, how important it is to appreciate every moment.
I like that. And as we finish up our deep dive into the Idaho College murders, it makes you realize something, doesn't it? Sometimes those little things that seem totally random and unimportant, they can be the key to figuring out even the most complicated mysteries. It's like a reminder to stay curious, to really pay attention, and to never think that one tiny detail couldn't change everything we thought we knew.
That's something to think about. Until next time, everybody, stay curious, stay informed, and thanks for being with us on The Deep Dive.